Do you dream of hopping into a longboat with your shield brothers and going out on epic raids? Do you long to bring glory to Odin, Freya, and Thor with a community of fellow Nordlings? Do you wish you were a Viking lord in charge of a colony of your own design? Then you should definitely take a trip to Land of the Vikings. Land of the Vikings is a survival colony game developed by Lapse Games and published by Iceberg Interactive. The game was released last month, but just dropped its 1.0 version recently. Thanks to the awesome folks over at Home Run PR, I received an early preview of the build, and I'm happy to share my thoughts on it with all of you. But first, if you enjoy this type of content, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me over on Patreon or with a YouTube channel membership. My long-term goal is to make these videos full-time someday, and by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. As mentioned, Land of the Vikings is a colony survival game where you'll be tasked with building a thriving Nordic community from the ground up. There's a lot of facets to this game. Resources to learn about, tech trees to sift through, and structures to understand. But that's all par for the course with strategy games, as anyone who's ever fired up Total War or the classic Warcraft games will tell you. Fortunately, Land of the Vikings goes about introducing you to their game mechanics in a way that feels helpful and informative without coming off as overbearing or like the developers are holding your hand. This has got to be a tricky thing to manage from a game design perspective. You want players to understand your system, but at the same time, you don't want them to feel railroaded or like you don't trust them to figure it out on their own. Land of the Vikings shows you what to do for a while and then lets you go off on your own. So they definitely threaded the needle between throwing us to the wolves and keeping us in the nest with this one, and Lapse deserves some serious props for their decision making here. I also really liked the entire process of village building. The interface and the way you position prospective buildings, and even the way they start out as foundations before becoming finished products, reminds me so much of Warcraft 3, a game I pumped hundreds, if not thousands of hours into when I was a teenager. I have to admit, I got way more excited about this than I probably should have, but I think it really speaks to the fact that Lapse did their homework, looked at aspects of strategy games that worked, and emulated them in their game. As for the resource management system, it's pretty intuitive. You've got your usual suspects, a form of currency, in this case silver, as well as stone, and of course, wood. But in order to use the wood for certain things, you have to turn it into lumber, which is fairly next level if you ask me. It's cool to see the game taking a resource that players are used to just hoarding and adding some level of realism to it. After all, the real-life Vikings would have needed to do this too, so the added immersion is certainly a nice touch. Even gathering wood itself has a nice twist to it, as you can designate certain areas as gathering zones. This will instruct your workers to cut down the trees, but ensure they grow back the following year. This, in and of itself, isn't all that realistic, but the principle behind it is. Actual communities during this time period wouldn't just chop down trees like the Onceler. They'd be cautious about which ones they used and try to make sure they didn't gut the entire forest. In terms of the actual village building, it's incredibly fun. It doesn't take long for you to get really into growing your Viking community, planning out how you'd like it to look, and thinking about what structures you'd like to add next. I think a big part of the beauty behind the game's construction aesthetic comes from the addition of roads. Connecting your houses and halls with roads and lining them with fire pits for warmth and lighting just makes everything look so much homier and more welcoming than settlements from other strategy games and village builders. We've already mentioned my nostalgia for Warcraft 3, but laying down roads and getting really into the best way to tie them and my buildings together took me back to my days playing Roller Coaster Tycoon, another formative memory for me. I'm not sure if Lapse was looking for that type of comparison, but I, for one, enjoyed the trip down memory lane. But I think my favorite thing about the game is that it doesn't rush you into warfare or militarizing your community. It keeps its focus on community management and growing your Viking homestead, pushing the training of warriors to late-game content. It has to be tempting for a strategy game to pull the trigger on this type of thing far earlier. It's a selling point for a lot of folks, but I applaud Lapse for taking the road less traveled. So, needless to say, there's a lot of good things here. But what about the negatives? Like most modern strategy games, Land of the Vikings uses narrative events to break up the gameplay and add in some branching, narrative storytelling. After a while, these events become repetitive, as anyone who spent, 100 hours or so playing Total War or Crusader Kings will tell you. But the events in Land of the Vikings get repetitive surprisingly fast, and based on what I could tell, the decisions you make here don't have a whole lot of impact. I did like that the game tries to give each villager their own personality, with statistics and families, but despite that, they still don't feel all that developed. I didn't expect them to be fully fledged characters or anything along those lines, but I do think they could have done more with the stats they did give to the villagers. And though I personally enjoy that the game punts on raiding and warfare until later in the game, making it end of tech tree type stuff, I could see that turning off some folks who've come to expect that type of thing. Overall, if you're into city builders or strategy games, especially ones with some nostalgic overtones, I definitely recommend checking out Land of the Vikings. To check out the game for yourself, just follow the link below to the game's Steam page. But if you'd like to watch a Let's Play of it, stay tuned, because I'll be posting one early next week. Until then, stay tuned for more video game reviews and video game analysis. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.